right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us during this week of Thanksgiving for a riveting book club event we have going on tonight. I'm Tabitha Robinson. I'm the president of the Women's Political Collaborative of Tennessee. Thanks again for joining us tonight. Before we get started and before I kick it off to Sarah Lee, I just wanted to cover a couple housekeeping rules. Of course, while our panelists are speaking tonight, please remain on mute. And this is also being recorded, so just be mindful of that as well. If you enjoyed tonight and all our book club events that we've been having, good news for you. We've got a couple more coming up in the new year. In January 21st, we're featuring Alice Randall as she discusses her book, My Black Country. And then in March, we are also featuring Jared Sullivan with his new book, Valley So Low. So this might be our last book club event for 2024, but we already have a few lined up for 2025. So it's going to be another great book club year for WPC. And before I pass it off to Sarah Lee, I'd like to do a brief introduction of our panelists tonight. And Sarah Lee can fill in the gaps where I miss. But we have Judge Jennifer Smith with us today. She is a criminal court judge. She's actually the presiding judge for the Davidson County Residential Drug Court. So Jennifer, thank you for being here with us tonight, Judge Smith. And then we also have, of course, Mayor Megan Barry. She is the former mayor of Nashville, the first one to be elected to the office, the first woman. And while she was in office, she lost her only son, Max, to a drug overdose. But since leaving her position, Miss Barry is working to combat the shame and guilt that comes up from the disease of addiction and to help those who struggle with substance use disorder and their loved ones by speaking up and speaking out. So I think that's why we're here this afternoon. So Sarah Lee, I'm going to pass it off to you. Thank you again for everyone being here tonight. And if you have any questions, feel free, panelists, to pose those. And of course, our guests to put those in the chat.
Okay, can I get everyone to unmute for just a moment? And if that's great. If you all would, I'm going to go around and let you introduce yourselves so that Megan knows who is here. Tabitha, tell us your name and your title or how we know you, please. And I'll call on the rest of you quickly.
All right, Tabitha Robinson, president of Women's Political Collaborative.
Jim Schulman.
Woman. I'm something with the Women's Political Collaborative. Am I the treasurer? What am I? Former vice mayor. I don't know what I am, but I'm a member.
All right. And a big hotshot at Cumberland College teaching professor. Yay. Laquita Martin.
I am a member at large and do advocacy work.
Jenny Charles.
Hi, I am the past president of WPC, and thank you so much, Mayor Barry, for joining us tonight. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you.
Nancy. Okay. Larry, turn your volume down. Sarah Lingo.
There, I'm Sarah Lingo with Sister Cities of Nashville, and I am proud to have worked on Megan's 2015 campaign for mayor. Hi, Megan.
Hi, Sarah. Chris Carlton. Can you unmute? Joyce, have you got everyone muted?
They may be muted because I had it set up to mute at the beginning.
Okay. All right. So can you unmute a minute?
Well, if I can figure out how to do that, you're asking a whole lot of somebody who doesn't know how to do this.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, you know what? We'll just press on and people can add more information if they want to in their in the chat about themselves. Okay, we'll hop on in there. That was a good idea in theory. So we are here to talk about this book. It's What You Do Next. I'm so proud in so many ways of our speaker tonight, the author tonight, because she has written a book and had it published, and it's a very, very courageous book. So tell us a little bit about the process, Megan, of writing this book.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Shirley, and thanks everybody for making time tonight. I know that with Thanksgiving right around the corner, it's crazy busy, but thank you. So this book came, some of you may be aspiring writers and maybe want to write a book. So let me tell you how I did this process. So back in 2020, when we were all shut down with COVID, I reached out to an organization in New York called Gotham. And Gotham had always done things in person, but I'd never had time to go to New York and do like a 10-week course. But during COVID, I could. And so I signed up, and it was a 4-hour course every week. And I would meet with my classmates, and we do just like exactly what we're doing right now on Zoom. And we would write, and then we would share. And this was memoir 1. So I took memoir 1. And it was great. I had lots of fun. And so then I took memoir 2 again after that. And then I went back and took memoir 1 again because I figured I really hadn't gotten it. And then through the whole process, I was sharing with my husband, Bruce. I'm sharing all this stuff with him. And one of the first things he says to me is, apparently the first casualty of memoir is truth. And I said, well, this is my truth. This is how I remember things. And he said, well, I remember things, a little different. And so I said, well, then maybe I should write fiction. He said, okay, well, maybe you should. So I took a fiction class. And fiction was really interesting because our professor would give us like a prompt, and it would be something like, on a train, you're on a train. And like my classmates would go off and write these really interesting things about being on a train. And I would end up writing about having a conversation with Bruce because I couldn't really come up with much. So I would show everything that I was writing in fiction to Bruce, and he said, you know what? I don't think you can call it fiction if all you've done is change our names. So I went back to so that's how this book kind of came to be. And it's a long process. Oh my gosh, it took a while to write it, and then you got to get an agent, and then you got to find somebody who will publish it. But it was a lot of fun, and I'm so glad it's finally out into the world. It does feel like you launched something.
Well, we're going to come back to that at the end, because towards the end I'm going to ask, what did your editors want to take out, and what did you want to put back in? But we'll talk a little bit more about the book. The heart of this book to me, of course, is your story about Max, who I had the honor of meeting several times. And I could see so much of you, Megan, and Bruce in him. Can you share what you've learned with the process of addiction? And then we'll talk to the judge here about what she sees.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm so happy that Judge Smith is on here tonight, because one of the things that Nashville does incredibly well is drug court. And so for Max, just to give you like the 5 minutes on Max, right? So he was our only child. He was our sweet boy, and he drove us crazy, and his death didn't make him perfect, but he was ours. And, he was our only. And one of the things about Max is he had a type A mom who was always busting his chops. And so I was on Max, and by the time he was a junior in college, Max was definitely, his voice was different. Bruce and I definitely knew something was wrong with him. And what we came to find out was that Max had been prescribed Xanax, and because he had anxiety and he was stressed like a lot of kids are. And I assume that he was prescribed it by a medical professional, but I honestly don't know, because Max would never sign the medical documents so that we could ever know what was going on with him, which I think is probably fairly typical. So we were able to get Max home when we noticed that there was something in his voice, and we were able we had three things. We were really lucky, and I'm sure Judge Smith can tell you that this doesn't always happen. Max was willing to go to rehab. Max, there was a bed available, and we had insurance that would pay for it. So it was kind of like this, like three really amazing things that happened. And Max went to rehab, and I still remember when he came home, and we got him home, and I went and picked him up from the airport. You know, I got him in the car, and I am taking him to the emergency room because there's something wrong with my child. And we go to the hospital, and he gets taken in the back. He and the doctor go off, and the doctor comes to say to me, look, I can't tell you anything of what's going on because Max won't sign the form. So at that moment, Max's shame was the most dangerous thing in that treatment room because he wouldn't tell me. And I firmly believe that if the doctor had said to him, hey, you got cancer, it's totally like treatable, we can figure this out, you're gonna have to manage it, but like we're gonna find a way, Max would have said, let me sign the form, let me get my mom back in here, and let's figure it out. Instead, the doc said, I can't tell you anything, but I knew enough to know that it was drugs. So I go home, I get on Google, and I'm Googling, and I don't call anybody. I don't call my mom, I don't call my dad, my Max's pediatrician, I don't call a friend, I talk to nobody because I'm ashamed. And just to put it in perspective, at that moment, I'm the mayor of Nashville. I have resources at my disposal, people I could call, but I don't call anybody. And I think that's what I am trying in this book. You know, Max's story doesn't have to be anybody else's story if we just talk about this and we bring it out in the open. And, you know, like I said, Max had three things, which was that he was willing to go, we could pay for it, and there was a bed available. And we got to make that happen for a lot more people.
Your response, Judge?
Well, I absolutely agree with Megan, and I think even about the shame component. And you know, even today, when there's so much public awareness of you know, substance use disorder and the opioid crisis, and we all talk about it, and we know that we've got an opioid problem, we know we've got a fentanyl problem, we know we've got these problems. There is still a stigma attached to someone who actually has the problem itself, and so I certainly see that with people who come into the drug court in Davidson County, and we have a residential drug court. But and the other thing that that Megan touched on was that sort of the beginning of the addiction always starts with something else. And, you know, and I see this a lot with people who come into the criminal justice system, and we will send them to maybe a shorter rehab, a 28-day rehab at Buffalo Valley, or bring them into DC-4 even for a longer period. And you can detox someone for 30 days or for a year or for 18 months even, in a controlled environment. Any person with a substance use disorder can be compelled not to use. But what I've seen is that the substance, the use, is not the problem. The substance use is a symptom of a problem. And so the difficulty is trying to figure out the root cause of that. But as Megan mentioned, you know, it's so hard to sort of break through that stigma and that shame and to say, I've got a drug problem. I mean, there is still that social stigma to it.
Well, and also, you know, I think that it's gotten better. You know, this is back in 2016, and you know, we sent Max to Florida because that's where he wanted to go, where he was willing to go. But the guy, I mean, we found out later, again, all the things we didn't know. It was some guy who basically run a concrete business who had bought up all these motels down in Florida. I mean, and he was doing these 30-day rehabs. And you know, so
good Lord.
You know, it was interesting. A couple months ago, we got a notification because that business has gone bankrupt, and there's all the medical records from that Max had, and we're, I guess, the bankruptcy court or lawyer says, like, you can have these records, like, if you want them, otherwise they'll be destroyed. Of course, we can't have them because we don't have medical permission to have them, so we can't actually get them. But you know, there's so many bad actors as well in this world. I mean, like I said, it's gotten better since 2016, but man, you know, and it costs tons of money. So you really do hope that we're putting guardrails around, like Buffalo Valley, like, you know, reputable places that are actually going to do and help the folks that need the help.
So if I don't have insurance, if I'm not willing, so what happens if I'm that kind of addict?
You know, I hate to say this, but you're probably the best opportunity for you is going to be if you end up getting arrested and made to do it. And I hate that, Judge, but.
Well, you know what? It's interesting that you say that, because a couple of weeks ago, I received a letter from the mother of a young man who's in my drug court, and he has graduated to the aftercare component. He made it through the residential component, and his mother sent me a letter. And he's a young man. He's in probably his mid-20s, and he's doing really well. His mother sent a letter to me thanking me for working with him and helping him. And she said in this letter that when he was in the throes of his addiction, her greatest hope was that he would be arrested. She was fearful of his dealers. She was fearful of that call in the night. It was her greatest fear. And her best hope was that he would be arrested and taken off the streets. So it's interesting you say that. It's exactly right.
And that in and of itself is a huge indictment to how we haven't gotten our arms around this.
Right.
Yeah.
So as you're unfolding this book, I heard you speak last year to the Breakfast Club, or I can't remember, was it the year before, and you read the chapter to us about the process of getting Max body back from Colorado to Nashville, and just how absolutely brutal that was. And how did you find the wherewithal to put that down on paper?
Yeah, you know, Sarah Lee, it's interesting you should ask that, because that's the very first thing I ever wrote, and everything else came later. So I did a writer's retreat, like there was around Nashville. This is before I did the Gotham class, and I just wanted to go away for a weekend, and that was the one piece that came out of it, and it flowed really easy, which, you know, I think a lot of the other stuff was a lot harder to do, but that kind of that was the cornerstone for the whole book, was bringing Max's body home and how it all started.
So share a little bit. I saw, I don't remember if it was the beginning of the book, of one part where Bruce says, "Well, I'm a real bastard in this book." Something funny. I mean, how did you go?
Like an ass.
Ass. Okay. Ass. How did you? That sounds more like Bruce. Sorry about that, you all. I should have got the Bruce and not been so offensive. How much of this did you share with him? Was it like, okay, here's a chapter for you to read, or was it the end product, or?
I mean, you know, this is a long time, and I shared with him everything. And so because I would say to him, like, well, you know, one of the things I think you had asked about, like, are there things that I left out or put back, or, you know, or something. And I gave Bruce absolutely carte blanche and said, you know, if there's anything that you read that you don't like or you don't want in, then I'm taking it out, because, you know, And he did avail himself of a couple of those those options. You know, but for we just had a Thanksgiving with his family, and you know, his family was a little bit more reticent about this idea that, again, sharing, right? Like, and they still don't want to talk about the reason that Max died, let alone everything else. But you know, like that for them, that is incredibly embarrassing, and it's incredibly painful. And I think it's more the painful part, right? Not the embarrassing part. It's more about the pain. And I think anybody that's lost somebody to addiction or a child, you know, I don't know how to say this. Like, if you've never experienced that, and I hope you never do, it's really hard to understand how people can get up every day. And what Bruce and I have tried to share with each other and with others is that you do find a way to go on. And this book is a lot about that. Like, you know, you can have your worst day. And my worst day was not the day I resigned from office. My worst day was the day that Max died. And picking yourself back up and giving others hope and moving forward, I think that, you know, that's easier said than done on some days. You know, the grief is still very real, and it comes at you in weird ways, right? So it's not a linear process for anybody that's ever grieving. You know what I mean? Like, you're fine 1 minute, and then something clicks, and you're like, wow, I don't know why all of a sudden I'm deeply sad. But what the book tries to do is to try to show you that you can pick yourself back up. And you know, there's a lot in it that's not just about Max. You know, serious, you know, errors of judgment, everything that I did that was wrong, and trying to own up and take responsibility for what you've done. And because you know, that is how you actually move forward. You have to own what you did. And so I think that's also the message of the book. You know, I talk a little bit at one point about my inauguration, and you know, all these little girls, and you know, and I would come across little girls all the time, and like I think I mentioned the other day, Sarah Lee, when we were talking, that this mother had sent me this lovely note about how her daughter had dressed up like me when I was mayor for Halloween, because she had to dress up like somebody she was proud of. And you know, I've also tried to now say to all those little girls that I disappointed in really deep ways, that you can make a mistake, and you can make lots of mistakes, and you can still put your life back together. And I think that's also the message of this book. I mean, Max is the central theme, but also, you know, the idea that, you know, we're not perfect, but if we own what we do, like addiction, like, you know, all the things that come with that, then maybe we can keep on putting one foot in front of the other.
So when you talk about the mistakes that happened in leaving the mayor's office, I did find a little bit of humor, and you're trying to go incognito to the airport to leave to go to, was it your sister in Montana?
Yeah.
In Montana, and you couldn't even go to the bar. They knew who you were there when you went out with them.
Hanging out in Manhattan, and not that Manhattan, Montana.
Right.
The bartender, I was sitting at the bar, and I handed her, you know, my credit card. I said, hey, I'm Megan. She said, I know, honey. Ahead of the law, aren't you? I said, what? And she said, hey, we get CNN here. I know who you are. But that was also really a great lesson. I mean, I think there's just great lessons all through this that, for me, and which were, you know, I wasn't going to be able to go hide in Montana, which sounded really appealing at the time, just to disappear. And you know, again, you know, you got to face the things that you've done, and then take responsibility. And coming back to Nashville was part of that for me. Instead of staying and getting lost in hip waders and Yellowstone in Montana.
Right. So can you tell a little bit too, what made you decide to run for office again, to run for Congress?
Yeah, so thanks for everybody on the call who supported me. I'm so grateful. We did not win, but I will tell you that one of the things that I have always deeply believed in is that in order to have a democracy, you have to have candidates and people have to have choices. So this was a seat that was, it was deeply red, but there had been some movement in 2018 when Bredesen ran. If this seat had existed back then, it was, definitely he only lost this district by 1%. So, there was a whole lot of shifts. My opponent didn't want the job. He got out at one point and said he didn't want to run and he wasn't going to run. And then he got back in. So, it was really interesting. I did it. Bruce and I decided, we got in the car, we said, let's drive this district. And it took us 10 and a half hours to drive it because it's gerrymandering at its best. And as we drove, we talked about, the fact that I always have had a heart for service and driving through these places and seeing the opportunity for what these folks, deserve from their representative was inspiring. I spent a lot of time with a lot of the elected officials in these places who are definitely of one party and I'm of a different party. But what we found were the commonalities. And I still remember standing next to a guy, a mayor, and one of the things he told me was, I need an ambulance because I only have one that goes over this whole county. And if one's in service, then that means the next person isn't going to get ambulance care until it's free. And, and my tax base doesn't have the support. I can't get that. And then, a couple months later, I was back standing with him at a festival and lo and behold, a woman broke her hip right in front of us. And we waited 45 minutes for that ambulance to come. And so, that guy, he didn't care what my party was. He just wanted me to help him. And I found that. Now, did he vote for me? I don't know. I needed 40 more thousand people to vote for me, so maybe not. But what I found were the commonalities in the folks across this district. And they resonated. This is urban, suburban, exurban, rural, and boy, there's these folks deserve representation, and so I really hope that they get it.
Can you talk about any of the commonalities that you saw living in, you live in the heart of the city versus going out to the district?
Sure. Sadly, one of them is the opioid crisis.
Right. Do any of those counties have anything like what Judge Smith supervises here, or some of the things that Sheriff Hall has done when he?
Judge, I haven't come across it, Judge Smith, but maybe if there are drug courts in kind of middle Tennessee. It goes from the Montgomery down to Wayne.
There are a number of drug courts in jurisdictions all over the state. I think we've got, we may have, even as many as 70 across the state, but there are only 3 residential courts, residential programs in the state of Tennessee. DC4 here in Nashville, which we right now we accept both men and women, although our women's population is small. Judge Dalton has a women's residential drug court, and then there's another men's only residential drug court in Morgan County. So that for some people, the outpatient programs that are run out of General Sessions Court will work. For the more severe individuals who are caught up, who are convicted felons, who have longer sentences, who are really looking at time in the Department of Correction, the residential drug courts are usually their last opportunity to stay out of the department.
So what do you all see, Judge and Megan, what do you all see happening to kids, or and by kids, I mean college age and down, who think they're invincible, whose brains aren't formed yet. I mean, what happens to those people?
I don't, in my experience, and I've only been doing this, I came into office in 2018, so it's not really been that long, but the people that do best at DC4 are people who are middle-aged, to be honest with you. They've been in and out of jails. They've got a record so long they can't even remember how many convictions they have. We do have some younger people who've done well, and I mentioned one of our younger participants who was in his mid-20s. One of the reasons that he's doing really well is because he's very, very bright, and he recognizes that he's gotten into some serious problems, and he's making, he affirmatively wants to do something about it, and he's got strong family support. But a lot of the younger individuals who are caught up in the criminal justice system, they just have a hard time. They're just not there yet. They really do think they're invincible. So I don't have a lot of success stories in that age demographic. Just a handful.
So I know that I happened to see this the other day because it was intriguing to me in Bledsoe County. So we're starting to see a lot of the money from the settlement flow into Tennessee. And so in Bledsoe, they've actually hired an opioid prevention teacher who is working with students every day. So, that's how they're using their $65,000. And I think she seems to be having some success. Bledsoe has got a huge opioid crisis. I think they're one of the worst counties in the state. So, and not only are the kids at risk, but so many of them are coming to school from parents that are also addicts. So, they're coming out of an environment where they may not have a bed or food or transportation or all the other things that come when people are in the throes of addiction. So, I think one of the things that we can all be, focused on, and there are a couple things we can all be doing, and that is one is to just make sure that the money from the settlements flows into things that are actually helping, that they don't get waylaid to become, road money or some other kind of budget item.
So when you're talking about settlement money, can you elaborate what that is? And is that trickling through the state, or is it coming directly? How's it coming to local governments?
Sure. So this is all the pharma money that settlements, and it's coming to state, but it's also coming locally. We've got, I think, 2 bites of that apple, and Judge Smith may know more about how that's being allocated.
I think they've had one round of allocations, and I noticed that the Department of Mental Health has just opened up another application window that I think closes mid-December. So I think it's an application. It's by application. So and I don't know exactly how that's being. DC4 doesn't have any yet, although we may throw an application in for this next round. But we have a pretty large grant from the Department of Mental Health, so that's our primary operating budget.
And Davidson County has gotten some of those dollars as well from the pharma settlement. And the aggregate number sounds really large, I think, but it's over a 15-year period. It gets doled out. It's so what sounds like a big chunk is not really. It's still something. And we would be wise to invest it in some significant ways that are helping people. Sadly, treatment beds are really, they're hard to come by. And I think that's one of the ones where if we can find ways of, more outpatient treatment that works, and, residential is amazing, but that's a huge investment. And also a lot of people have to figure out how to still have their life and get treatment. So it's they don't have the ability to just go away. I mean, Max was a student, so, you know, he could go away for 30 days or, you know, but people who need to go for 30, 60, 90 days, I still remember Max saying to me, one of the hardest parts about folks who he, you know, met in treatment who had been there multiple times was that they always had to go back to their environment. And they needed to figure out how to manage that.
That is the hardest transition. And as I said before, you can take anyone out of their environment and put them somewhere that's controlled, get them cleaned up, get them physically healthy. But then if they don't have the tools to go back to their environment, you've got to get them away from the people, places, and things that are triggering that. And you've got to find out what the underlying problem is. Whether that is a mental illness, whether that is a trauma, whether it's something, you know, there's always a reason. There's always something. Sometimes it's obvious what it is, and sometimes it's just not. But yeah, we have a very structured program at DC4 that's phased, and they're in, and they're very, very restricted for the first year or so, and then they're allowed to go out and work for several months while they're still living there. But the most difficult transition is when they go from living there and being very much controlled in their movements to going into aftercare and living in the community and having to deal with the stressors of that. So it is very difficult. I mean, life is stressful. And when you're, just if you're not dealing with these problems, but it's really hard. And we had folks that go out and they just can't deal with it, and they have to come back in, and we'll bring them back in residence and let them kind of regroup and get their bearings again, and then start them again in aftercare. I mean, I've had people come in and out several times. I mean, I'll keep working with them as long as they have a sentence left. But unfortunately, eventually their sentence runs out, and I can't do anything else to help them. So
got to be very frustrating.
And I think to add one more thing to that, I mentioned that Max, had anxiety and started with Xanax. So many folks start with a prescription. That's the other thing. When Max died, every drug, he had some cocaine in his system, but every drug he had in his system was a prescription drug. And my kid did not have a prescription for any of them. So one of the things that you can absolutely do tonight after this call is count it, lock it, drop it. So go to your own medicine cabinets and just check and see what you have. We all have these old, opioids or hydrocodones sitting around from the tooth thing that we had, like that we never took all of them. It's not going to be your family or you, but somebody who is going to come into your house maybe looking for those. So if you're not using them, if you are using them, block them up. But if you're not using them, drop them off. And we have all kinds of places in Davidson County where you can drop. Don't flush them down the toilet. You can take them to a police precinct. The pharmacies do drop days where you can get rid of your old drugs. But that's one thing that we can all just be better about. Like I said, Max died with prescription drugs in his system, but he didn't have a prescription for any of them.
I can remember being given stuff. My mother meant well, but I had bad day of cramps, and she would give me some of her pain pills. So, and when my father died, she wanted to take all of his diabetes medicine and take them to the place where she had community meals and distribute them, because she was a child of the Depression. I was like, oh no, that is such not a good idea. Right. So I know. But that's terrible. And I certainly, people you hear about that. And I'm one of the ones that needs to never use my tooth surgery medicine. And I need to do something about that and get it out of there. Let me go back to the questions that we have. Jenny Charles says, Megan, can you speak about your process in writing your memoir? Did you write some every day and then go back and edit? I'm in the process of writing about a criminal case I handled, and I'm taking classes at the Porch in Nashville.
Oh, Jenny, that's so great. The Porch is amazing. Oh my gosh, I bet you're having a great time. So what I did is, because I had a class, I'm one of those folks that does really well with structure and a deadline. So because I would have to present or read or do something every Wednesday, that made me write to meet, like, it was like my homework, right? If I hadn't had the structure of a class, I never would have done it, because I would have said, oh, I'll get to it, or I'll make it happen. So, maybe hopefully the porch is actually giving you a deadline. And I've never been a journaler, so I didn't have, I don't have like all these, journals. So for me, it was really just about having a process and a deadline.
And Kate, did you get your question answered? I saw where Joyce said she's talking about Judge Angie Dalton having a drug court for women. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. And
Okay.
the question was where, I mean, DC4 does take women, but I will say that our numbers the numbers of women that we were getting applications for started dropping off when Judge Dalton's court opened, because I think the other courts were sending the women to the women's facility, which makes perfect sense, because they really, we have men and we have women, but we have two different treatment processes and systems, because they're just a completely different. I mean, women come with a different problem set altogether. A lot of them have severe trauma. A lot of them have sexual trauma. A lot of them have children, and they're dealing with that on top of, and the men do too, but the women, it just is it's a different pressure that the women face. And so we still take women, but our numbers are reduced. So I'm really glad, and Judge Dalton is doing a fantastic job with the women, and is having some good success.
Are there other questions? Rita says, let me go back up here. Great seeing you again. Seeing your smile again, Megan. Rita Roberts Turner says that. Happy Thanksgiving. Can't wait to read the book.
Yes. If you guys haven't gotten the book yet, there's lots of ways to get it. You can get it at Parnassus. You can get it on online, Landmark Books, the bookshop. And then the audio just came out as well last week, if you prefer to listen. And I got to read it, which was
yay.
Somebody told me though there's a part of the book where I say my name, my high school. I ran for office in high school, and I say something like, my name is Megan Mueller. But apparently, my friend told me in the audio I say I'm Megan Barry, because I just didn't even think about it. But there's a little Easter egg in there. Apparently, you can find if you listen to the audio. But that was a lot of fun too, and I wasn't sure. We reached out to Meryl Streep, but apparently she was not available.
So Megan, Sarah Lee, can I ask a question?
No. Does anybody ever say no to Joyce?
I know. So Megan, so this is coming off the drug court part, going to parts in the other book. So when Bruce, when you talk about that, Bruce kind of what I would say, you saw the emotional effects that he really felt about losing Max in the kitchen. Is that the point was there a point there that you were like, it also gave you a sense of relief that you weren't the only one that was grieving so deeply, and that it allowed you to go, I think I can save my marriage?
So I'll just tell you, like, the statistics aren't great. 80% of people who lose a child get a divorce. And add in everything else, and the statistics are really not great. So the fact that Bruce and I, this book is really about the three things that I loved the most. They're about Max, my job as the mayor, and Bruce, and the two things that I lost over the course of 2.5 years, and the one thing that I could save, and that was my marriage to Bruce. And I think we just celebrated our 31st wedding anniversary about a month ago, and and it's that moment where we grieved very differently, and I think that's pretty common, because again, grief is so personal, and when you are grieving, it's I write about Debbie. Debbie, who was a woman who reached out to us and would send us cards. And, and anytime a card would come, we'd call it a Debbie Day, and it would give Bruce and me something to talk about. I mean, it kind of became stalker-esque. She sent me 97 cards. But, it was one of these things where it was this beautiful outreach that she did. And it gave us something to connect over. And we had hardly anything to connect during that time. So, I do talk a little bit about that. And I think, we're oftentimes, when we love someone or know someone who is struggling, grieving, lost somebody, we don't know what to do. And, Debbie just sent us a card. And she didn't know that act of doing that was like helping us repair our marriage. And I say that to say, like, so many times we hesitate or don't reach out or don't send that text or we don't send that card because we're afraid of being intrusive or we don't know if it's, if we really should. I would encourage you to always do it because you don't know how it's going to be received on the other end and what that may foster for somebody. I'm thankful every day for Debbie.
I think towards the end of the book, when you are talking about you and Bruce finding your way to each other again, but I'm telling you, Megan, going into that kitchen and opening the refrigerator when you're going to stay with the dogs that night and Bruce was out of town and you're like, I'm going to Home Depot and fixing things here was priceless.
Yep. So somebody just asked if about Debbie in the chat. So Kate, we got our last card from Debbie the day 1 year anniversary of Max's death, and she wrote in the card, "This is my last note. I choose a family every year that I do this for, and this will be the last time you'll hear from me." And and it was the last card that we got from Debbie. But of course, me being me, I got in the car and drove to Ohio because I had to know who Debbie was. And that's not in the book at all. And I showed up on Debbie's front porch.
You did?
Oh, absolutely. And so I did meet Debbie. And interestingly enough, Debbie had been doing this. This is her ministry. She calls it After the Casserole, because this idea that, people show up when people are grieving with a casserole, but then they don't show up anymore, like after 3 months. And she picks 10 families every year and she sends them cards, and she sends them a different card. I mean, her whole dining room table was, this project. And I asked her, because she's been doing it for 20 years. I said, has anybody ever knocked on your door before? And she said, no.
Wow, that's great.
So anyway, it was, so I did track Debbie down because I had to know.
So what was it like recording your own book? Did you start, did you have to have any redos?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're in this booth and they, and you're reading it and you hear it. And it happened to be the day I was in the studio. And oh gosh, who's the really famous music duo that just got back together, that they hadn't been together in 5 years? It's not Brooks and Dunn, but it's like that. Maybe somebody on the call knows. But they were also in the studio that day. So the studio was really hopping and buzzing, and it was pretty fun because they were doing all their media consultants, and I'm just in this little room doing my book. And it took, initially they were like, hey, if you want to do it, that's great. And, the time I'm running for Congress, so I kind of had this other thing I had to do. And they're like, we need you to do, can you do 9 to, between 9 and 12 on Monday or Wednesday or Friday? And I'm like, sure, I can do it from 11 to 12. And they're like, no, honey, you got to be in this from 9 to 12 for 4 days in a row. I was like, but we did it, and we did it pretty fast. And I think my brother-in-law says you can listen to it at 1.5 speed and it'll go faster.
He must love you to be able to say that. So
That's-
what if looking back, are there any things you wish you could put back you could put in the book that you didn't think about before?
Well, I mean, this book evolved. I mean, in some of the earlier versions and drafts, I was, might not have been as nice. So, but eventually it was like, what life is about, who, being who you should be. And so, no, there was nothing in the book I put back in. My publisher at some point was like, well, let everybody think it's really salacious and it's really all that. It's all biased. It's gonna be tell-all. I'm like, well, it's not really. So they'll kind of be disappointed. He's like, yeah, but we don't have to tell them that.
Hey, so Megan,
Yeah.
so I asked you this earlier, and your answer to me struck me like really, it really was, I thought, a powerful answer when I asked you, for those of you on other, when we were making sure everything was set up okay, was, would you have written this if Max had not died? And your answer was, I think my life would have gone the same way if Max had not died. That was kind of a tipping point that just maybe pushed you a little further. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Sure. So I think, Joyce, one of the things that that I hope is clear in the book is, if you have a sick child or you're dealing with a child who is struggling as a parent with in a marriage, our crisis didn't start the day Max died. We were in crisis as a family way before that happened, and because we weren't willing to figure that out, that bled into all kinds of other things, and me making incredibly bad decisions. So, and I don't excuse it. But I think had we understood maybe more deeply what we were experiencing instead of kind of just retreating, maybe things, that would have been different. So I would say, no, I wouldn't have written this book if Max hadn't died. What I really wish is that we had understood how to manage everything that was happening while Max was alive.
Well, who does? I mean, who knows until you've walked through something like that, what that feels like, or how, you've certainly been through one of the worst things that a person can ever go through. So what advice do you have, Megan? Because you're doing something every day, So some of the people on this call may be grieving for the country right now, or may be still sad about the results of the presidential election that we just had, which was pretty definitive. I like to say I was with the 48%, but what do you do? What do you do to encourage people right now who haven't snapped out of it? I know that sounds very trivial to what you've been through, but when somebody's kind of overwhelmed with all of this.
Yeah, well, I guess what I would say, Shirley, is this is kind of the heart of the book, which it applies to lots of things. It's not what you did, it's not what happened, it's what you do next. It's what you do about it. And so wherever you are on that spectrum of grief, whether it's for an election, whether it's for somebody that you've lost, or whether it's your own stupid mistakes. It's not what you did, it is what you do next. And I think that's what we should all be looking forward to, which is, how do we pick up the ball? How do we pick ourselves back up? And how do we keep going? Because that's what should, lots of us are going to make serious mistakes in our lives. And, I'm one of them. And hopefully you don't end up completely being defined by that mistake. Hopefully
Right.
And pick yourself back up so that you can have that what you do next moment.
And that's very, very powerful. Laquita Martin says her life would have gone in another direction had her son not died. I advocate in his memory, even 26 years later.
You know, yeah. I mean,
Thank you for advocating.
thank you for sharing that.
I've had members of my family, but no one's died. Come close to it, but no one's died. But I do have some friends that carry around the spray that we're supposed to carry with us now. Can you tell us about that?
Let's talk a little bit about Narcan. Actually, there's now even a stronger one I think that the health department is putting out because of the fentanyl. I don't have it sitting with me right now. It's in my purse downstairs. I carry it with me. When Max died, there were 73,000 families in 2016 that lost somebody. In 2017 that lost somebody, and last year it was over 120. So the number is, the good news is that number is starting to go down. People are not dying because they are getting access to Narcan. And so you should carry it. In the state of Tennessee, you can carry it. It is not considered drug paraphernalia anymore. You can have it on you. The state health department will train you. You guys, your next WPC meeting, you should have the health department come and they'll even distribute it. And you can get it, and then everybody can have it. So I absolutely recommend that you do that. You can save a life. And the one thing that somebody said to me once was, why do you carry Narcan? Because Narcan is just giving people permission to do drugs. And my response to that was, if you're walking down the concourse at the airport and you see somebody having a heart attack, you're breaking the glass and getting the defibrillator. And you're not judging whatever their lifestyle is or what they did 20 minutes before or whatever. You're saving them. And if you save people, you can help them. So my hope is that people will carry Narcan.
And my hope is that everyone will give yourself the present of It's What You Do Next. It's such a powerful book. I'm going to go and listen to it now too. And I will have already given this to people that I believe that you have a real gift, Megan Berry, and I know we'll be hearing more and more from you, and appreciate your having the courage to write and talk about this. And I'm going to turn this over to Tabitha and Joyce, or whatever else I'm supposed to do.
Thank you, Sarah Lee. Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight. Judge Smith, Megan Berry, thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. And if you're interested in more book clubs, stay tuned because we've got a few more coming up in early 2025. And with that, we'll say have a great night, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving, and thank you again.
Thank you, Megan. Take care. Thank you, Judge.
Yep.